Hello, my name is Olurotimi Osha. Today is March the 31st, 2026. It's the last day of Women's History Month, and I'm discussing Esther. Esther is very significant. It's a book in the Bible, and it refers to a queen, a Jewish queen, who was married to the king of Persia, Xerxes the First. The story is situated in Shushan. That's what it's called in the Bible. That's equivalent as Susa. It's called also called Susa in Iran today. It's a major historic site where there's major excavations of the great Persian Achaemenid Empire that existed, and also the empire of the Medes, the Median Empire. I'm continuing with the story, and of course, I'm going to be doing some cross referencing as well. By this time, Queen Esther had already done the fasting, and she'd gone in to see the king. She'd made the famous statement, which is the boldest statement in the Bible, which was made by a woman: "If I die, I die," because there was a law that anybody who goes to see the king without being called in advance would be put to death unless the king holds out his golden scepter. And so she said, well, since she'll be breaking the law, uh, that if she dies, because this was very crucial. She was trying to save the Jewish people, her people, from genocide. And so we see that there's some times that, maybe the law has to be broken for because of a moral purpose. There's a moral basis for breaking the law. Maybe sometimes I'm not justifying anything, but I guess some people will see an argument in this. She goes after the 3 days of fasting. She goes to the king's palace, and then the king sees her, and instead, so he holds out his golden scepter, and so that spares her life, right? So she doesn't have to be executed, because when he holds out his golden scepter, that means she's found favor in the sight of the king. And then she goes and she touches the scepter. And so the king asked her, said something very significant. He said, because he was pleased to see her, he asked her that what's her request. He knew she wanted a petition. That's why she was risking her life and coming to see him without being called. And so she said, okay, whatever your petition is, that he would give it to her up to half his kingdom. Now, of course, this is a phrase, right? It's a Hebrew phrase, the biblical phrase that you see. It's common in the Bible. It doesn't literally mean that the speaker is literally going to give them half of the kingdom, right? They would be crazy. Like, this was the king of Persia who ruled over the largest, very vast empire. So that meant that he would literally be giving her half his authority and power. If that were possible, then she should have asked for it. Then she would have been able to, stop Haman herself. She would have equal power of the king to be able to stop Haman herself and protect her people. So obviously, she understood that was not what he was literally saying. It was just a figure of speech. And we see this is also in this figure of speech. It's like an idiom. It was spoken in the New Testament as well, right? When King Herod Antipas, right? When uh, you know Judea was under they were a vassal to the Romans at that time, the Roman Empire, and so uh, Herod Antipas, who was king of Judea, his wife's daughter, or his mistress's daughter. The story is complicated, right? So he was basically shacking up with the wife of his brother. His brother had been the one who had been the king, so but that's complicated. So the daughter, Herodias, had danced, right? She had danced for him, and he'd been allured, and then he told her that, okay, that what do you want? He'll give her anything, her petition, any request she wanted to make, up to half his kingdom. And instead of asking for half the kingdom, she asked for the head of John the Baptist. That's the forerunner of Jesus Christ. He was also Jesus Christ's cousin, by the way. Uh, so, uh, and that was how John the Baptist was executed. So that was just an idiomatic expression amongst Jewish people at that time. Another Jewish people, and I guess the Middle Eastern people, because this was something that the Persian king himself, said, right? The Persian king was one who was saying this, up to half his kingdom. And so you see this expression is recurrent in the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible. Another uh, another expression that I found intriguing, I had to go and do research on it, was the refrain 10 times. They'd say the refrain that 10 times you've committed something, you've done something. Like when Moses was referring to the children of Israel, when he said 10 times that 10 times they've sinned against God. Or even Jacob also said it in his accusation of his uncle Laban, that Laban had tricked him 10 times. So it's not literally 10 times, counting one, two, three, four, five, six, 10 times. It just means many times, numerous times, that it's annoying. Right? It's something very troubling. You've done something repeatedly. That's just So it's another idiomatic expression of those times. So that was a nice sidebar. But in any event, the king asked her to say what her petition was, and then instead she said, well, she invited the king to a banquet she would prepare for him, and she asked him to bring Haman, right? And she said she would tell him at the banquet. So she does this twice, right? So they go once and they go a second time. So in any event, Haman, he observes Mordecai again, and he observes Mordecai again, right? And he's really upset, right? That Mordecai won't bow down to him, right? Mordecai refuses to bow down to him. And I've talked about how there's this, to understand the rivalry between Mordecai, who was Jewish, and Haman, who was an Agagite. So he was actually Amalekite. He wasn't Persian, right? Because, he wasn't Persian, he was an Agagite. You see, we're told he's an Agagite in the book of Esther. And Agagite, Agag had been king of the Amalekites, so he was an Amalekite, right? And of course, they had this historic rivalry. That's the Jewish people and the Amalekites had the historic rivalry. And even though they were sort of related, they were like cousins, but they had this historic rivalry. And God had said, well, that the children of Israel should have destroyed all the Amalekites because of an injury that the Amalekites had done to them when they were coming out from bondage in Egypt, right? So, so Haman was, of course, still upset that Mordecai refused to bow down to him at the gates. So he goes to his wife, and he's expressing his displeasure, that that his enemy, that Mordecai is refusing to bow down to him. So his wife's name is Zeresh. So his wife and his friends, they call them wise men. So I guess there were other important, significant government officials. Right, Haman was the most significant of all the king's government officials because the king had just promoted him. Right, so he's discussing with them and he's plotting, and so he's upset. He's really pissed with Mordecai. He thinks Mordecai is arrogant, and but instead of just executing or dealing with Mordecai alone, when he learns that Mordecai is a Jew, actually has a hatred. Um, Against the Jewish people, and he decides, okay, can he annihilate all the Jewish people? And he's already planned it, right? And the king is given an instruction that all the Jewish people should be executed. And but he still wants to punish Mordecai, so he's already going to annihilate all of Mordecai's people, right? Because of Mordecai's actions, and then he decides he still wants to humiliate Mordecai personally. So you see how evil people manifest their grievances, right? They manifest this deep animus. So you see, Haman sort of epitomizes this hate, and this hate persists. You might come across people that are hateful like that. I actually met somebody like this that has this sort of hatred of 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 Haman, right? You see them, especially in a place like in a modernized place, modernity, because this we're now in a very nihilistic age, and so people will give into these visceral, diabolical reactions, and this was what uh, Haman was manifesting. And so his wife Zeresh, comes to him, and his friends, wise, they were supposed to be wise people, his friends, and he tells them what what was displeasing him. And so they told him that, okay, you know what, why don't you just make why don't you just make a, this is what his friends and his wife said, why don't you just make a gallows, erect a gallows, right? A gallows is where you hang people, right? The gallows, the platform. Make a gallows with 50 cubits high, right? 50 cubits high. Really, so it was really high because he wanted to be able to display the person being hanged, to public ridicule, let everybody be able to see him, so he very far and wide to display that humiliation, to project it far and wide because it's really high up. It's just like looking at a plane up in the sky, right? The higher it is, then the more you can see it, right? Like the Washington Monument, right? So a gallows, 50 cubits high. Cubits, I guess that's the as a unit of measurement of those times, right? So he says, erect a gallows 50 cubits high and ask the king that they should hang Mordecai on that day on a certain, they should ask the king that he should be hanged on the gallows. And so it made him very happy. He was very happy, glad. So he had the gallows erected, 50 cubits high, and he was going to request the king that he should have him hanged. The reason why he asked that, the reason they asked that he should petition the king to do it, to order it, is because it will be a public spectacle, right? It will be a public hanging, everybody's going to come out and see it, and so everybody will be able to behold the public humiliation of Mordecai, whom Haman hated because he wouldn't bow down to him. So he decides to to go and tell the king after he's erected this gallows. However, we're told in the book of Esther that the king went to sleep, and he was troubled. He was troubled in his sleep, and so he woke up and he was distressed, and he remembered Mordecai, right? Remembered Mordecai, and he asked his counselors to bring him. They call it the book of the Chronicles, right, of events of what should be done. So he realized, he called Haman and he asked him that, okay, you know what? Because he asked his counselors that, have they, what uh, reward did they give? How did they reward Mordecai? Because Mordecai saved the king's life. He had reported the eunuchs who had planned his assassination, but the king was troubled. He realized they hadn't done anything. They hadn't rewarded Mordecai. So he calls Haman. When Haman walks in, right? Um, Haman walks in, and so the king asks Haman that, okay, you know what? What what do the kings, what historically, what should he do for, how should he reward someone uh, that the king is pleased with? Because obviously the king was delighted that Mordecai had saved his life. So Haman, who is very self-engrossed, right? He's, talk about people being narcissists, right? Of course, that word is peddled easily today in narcissistic times, right? But back then, this guy was really self-absorbed. And so when the king is inquiring that, okay, how would he suggest that the king reward someone that he delights in? Haman automatically thinks that the king is talking about him, that it's him that the king is delighted in, and he wants to reward him again, right? So, uh, so uh, Haman goes that, well, he thinks of the best way that he can have the king, reward him. So what he thinks is, what he suggests is that, well, the king should uh, take robes that he's worn, his royal robes that he's worn, that's the king has worn, and his horse, a favorite horse that he's ridden on. So take things that belong, attire, clothes, garments, things, property, items, materials that belong to a king, and present it to the person that the king delights in. So to be garbed like he's a royal, like he's a king himself, and have the the highest of, one of the high princes, parade that person, parade this person around, right? Parade the favored person around on this royal horse, in front of people in the public square, right? So the king said, excellent, and told Haman that, well, that he should do so what he just suggested. He should do it for Mordecai, the enemy of Haman. Haman was actually just walking into the king's palace, about to tell him that, well, to request that, to suggest that the king ordered the public execution of Mordecai on the gallows. So I guess at this point, uh, Haman holds his tongue, so he's forced to do exactly um, what the king suggested. And again, now I'm going to be doing something. I'm going to be cross-referencing, and you see how you can do analysis, get insight from the Bible. So uh, eventually, what happens is that Haman then goes and takes all the raiments, the clothing, the robes of the king that he spoke of, and then the king's royal horse, and places Mordecai on the horse, clothes him, and then he parades him around, and he's praising him, because that was part of what he suggested, that he'll be praising him in the public square. So he's forced to be praising his enemy, the one he'd been plotting to kill. And this is consistent. You can find something like this in the Bible, in the book of Proverbs 14, verse 9. It says that evildoers will bow before the good, right? And the wicked will bow at the gates of the righteous. So we see that, Haman is forced to raise Mordecai, right? Because Mordecai is sitting on the king's horse, and uh, it's Haman himself, because Haman had been elevated to be the highest of the king's officials. He's the one who's now parading the his enemy Mordecai uh, in a subservient manner, right? He's parading him on the king's horse, dressed in the king's robes, right, royal robes, and parading him and singing his praise in the public square, in public, and that's consistent with something that's in the Bible, in the book of Proverbs, verse 14, verse 9. It says, "Evildoers will bow down before the good, and the wicked will bow at the gates of the righteous." And that's Proverbs chapter 14, verse 9, right? So that's cross-referencing. So you see, you can find a lot of insight in the Bible, wisdom, and you can see uh, how history can unfold in the Bible. So in any event, so this happens. So after this is done, Haman is disgusted, he's repulsed, he's angry, he goes home, he wails in shame, tells his friend and his wife what had just happened. And then it starts to dawn on his friends and his wife, and they said, look, you say something. And you say, well, if Mordecai is of Jewish descent, that you've already begun to fall before him, because like you just plan to set him up, and the king is asking you to elevate, to promote this guy that you've just planned his downfall. Is that if he's of Jewish descent, that you will surely fall, right? You fail before this person. Now, again, this isn't to be taken literally, right? That because I normally see people in certain churches, certain people, they misinterpret things. Again, remember that was why I quoted Matthew 3, verse 9. So Jewish is meant to just be template to reflect somebody who's righteous, that's favored by God. It has nothing to do with an ethnic background, right? So again, this book of Esther is really about the Manichaean conflict. That's the duality, the conflict between good and evil, right? And it's epitomized by Mordecai, who happens to be Jewish, and Haman, who happens to be a descendant of Amalekites, an Agagite who was an Amalekite, right? So it was just the conflict between good and evil, not literally that, well, a Jewish person. So replace Jewish with a righteous person, a good person, a righteous person, somebody who fears God, right? If it's somebody who's favored by God, then God protects him, right? And you will fall, you will fail, your attempts will fail, right? So that's really what it's how the uh, we should frame it, right? So in any event, they go again. He goes the second time to the uh, banquets prepared by Queen Esther. So they go to Queen Esther's home, and at this point, they feast, they're happy, and then Queen Esther, eventually tells gives a petition to the king, and but this is how she starts it. She explains that she's actually a Jew, right? She's a Jewish person, and she explains that that they that they're to be persecuted, that she and her people are supposed to be annihilated, right? There's supposed to be a genocide of them, and they're supposed to be humiliated and killed, her and all her people. And of course, she's a king's wife, and he's like, the king is pissed that who's the person who's going to kill them? That he's going to execute the person. That who's the person who's planning on killing them? And of course, she reveals. She said, Haman, he's the enemy of the Jewish people. That he's ordered, because he had ordered letters, a decree. The king had unwittingly issued a decree through him because of Haman's suggestion to have all the Jewish people annihilated, because Haman had said, well, that the Jewish people, they're different people. They don't follow the king's laws, and they defy the king's laws, and they should, like, they're troublemakers, and they should be annihilated. And so the king was upset. He was furious. Of course, he hadn't known his wife was Jewish, and so he orders Haman to be executed. Now, what happens is very ironic, right? Really, really ironic. Haman's friends, right? Haman's friends, the government officials who had advised him, with his wife Zeresh, who had advised him that he should go ahead and set up a gallows 50 feet high to have Mordecai hanged. They throw him under the bus, right? They throw him under the bus, they stab in the back, throw him under the bus, and suggest that, look, he told the king that, look, he had actually already prepared these gallows 50 cubits high, with a pole 50 cubits high, to hang Mordecai on it. It's still there, right? And then the king said, well, and they suggested, they can go and hang Haman on the same gallows they had advised Haman to prepare for Mordecai's execution, right? So you see, it's kind of funny how ungodly people are, right? Ungodly people, unrighteous people, evil people, they are the ones who will give you advice to do what is, evil, what is wicked, what is profane. But they're the same ones who will throw you under the bus, right? So, but people who are just, people who fear God, do not throw, they don't backstab. So this is something you have to be very careful of. When you see anybody who's just full of intrigue, right? They're backstabbers. They're constantly gossiping about other people. They're evil people. One day they'll turn against you. That's a characteristic of, it's a trait of evil people, right? And I saw this in the Department of the Navy, right? A person, they, oh my gosh, and they can be high up, right? This person, Nefertari McBride, she's an evil person, right? An evil person, a very perverse, evil person. She masquerades as a minister of God, as a minister of God, but she is actually a liar, a pathological liar, like these evil officials who gave Haman bad advice. And so you see them, because the reason I'm saying this is because I saw the libelous statements she made, the evil backstab and intrigue she did against me, right, in the Department of the Navy. This is where I was working, and she would tell lies and backstab, and you see, they're like slithering snakes, right? So this is their characteristic. But in any event, let me continue with this story and not digress. So they take Haman, they throw Haman under the bus, and the king orders for him to be executed. So he's executed on the same gallows on which he had planned for for uh, for Mordecai. And again, you see there's something a statement. There's a proverb in the Bible, in the book of Proverbs. It says, uh, "Those who dig a pit will fall into it." So you see, Haman had dug a pit, and he fell into the pit he dug for Mordecai. And if you roll a stone for someone, it will roll over you. That same stone will roll over you. So in any event, I will continue. This video has gotten long. I'll continue in a final video. My name is Oluroti Miosha. I'll keep you posted. Thank you.